The Saw Doctors in Boston. Read some of the New Testament, but some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the customs of Moses, you cannot be saved. Acts 15:1. Paul was in Antioch. These wet blankets were probably early converts from the Sadducees, a faction stricter about written law than the Pharisees, who were more receptive to change, but still skeptics of Jesus' message. Sadducees wanted to keep the Gentiles, non-Jews, separate because of a custom as old as Moses' writing of the Torah. These 613 laws of the Old Testament also include not to erect a stone pillar in a place of public worship, Deuteronomy 16:22. Men must not wear women's clothes, Deuteronomy 22:5. A priest must not enter the temple with unkept hair, Leviticus 10:6. Not to tattoo your skin, Leviticus 19:28. Peter amended this, preaching, "My judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write them to abstain from things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood." Come one, come all. Is this not evidence that arbitrary parts of the King James that are cited as examples of Christianity's lack of reason are actually discounting chronological order and the actual change to the truth that Jesus and his apostles made? It's not so radical as it appears now to say it was okay to do these things, as it was radical at first 2,000 years back. The following I also found fascinating and backs the case why mythology is necessary to understand how the word might have been translated over time. Here from apostles to Greeks. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Acts 14:12. This is before Paul chose Silas. I think Russian Silas. It also says in those 613 laws not to be superstitious. I listened to Florence and the Machine's Ceremonials album released in 2011. I hear from Florence Welsh, born 1986, on a record I've been listening to for over 10 years. What is the weight of an angel? The day before I agreed to go see the Saw Doctors, an Irish rock band, I had seen a concert of Erykah Badu, born 1971, and Mos Def, born 1973, in Boston with Mr. Collins. It was a performance of salvation, courtesy of two walking legends, two whom certainly were not afraid to have God do work on them. Mos Def, or Yasin Bey, looked like he does in the movies. Erykah remained standing for the entirety of a set lasting over an hour. I had to take an Uber home all the way from Boston after missing the last train to Worcester. The next day, I lay in bed all morning, focusing on the strain of me, which knows I'm a professor, and so must maintain legitimacy by putting that career path as my top priority. But I lay in bed, then I woke up, got over myself, began the day march, and I let myself be free. I wrote that little bit. These words are working good. I agreed to go see the Saw Doctors without even knowing they were an old Irish outfit established in Galway in the 80s. I was to ride with my dad's life partner, Tara's family. They picked me up here at Franklin Street. We first went to a friend's house where there was a 90-pound chocolate lab named Yogi. I stood there straight up and did not take anything too seriously for about a half hour, waited patiently since there were wives around. Then I went into their den and sat on the knit blanket on the couch. I sat there and talked to Tara about a book I was reading. Then we talked about family. And so I must not mind the limitations of my family so much as to not hold grudges to the extent that I might cramp the future growth, because the future is unknown. I might need family sooner than I think. Say, if I get all hyperactive, I have Freud and marriage to remind me to keep my spiritual integrity strong, but also pliant for family first. Inside, my friend, come on, you must live your life. We got in a van to be chauffeured back to Boston for my second time in 24 hours. Everyone knew they wanted to be themselves too, and I was myself for 2 minutes and took rests and never forgot the angel's share, in a sober sense. So I was a hit at the bar. I was cool in a striped polo. I was so cool because I was unbothered. I liked to see smiles. I smoked by a pond and made eye contact with a rabbit. I spent a few minutes outside in nature after I smoked, and then quickly checked in with the police. And I walked across the street. The angel wheeling a heavy car did not hit the crossing of people. He was in a litter, flat-footing across the asphalt jovially, in the July heat, as young men taking it slow and easy. The timeout bar was full of children, so it was easy to keep my weight down. I acknowledged I had been building an experience with the other 7 people, and couples, and old parents, and Tara. So I made sure to check in with them after I had walked away, and the sun had been setting. We walked to the MGM. There were Irishmen singing. They sang as I concentrated. Surrounded by the lovely wives and mothers, their chorus started to fit, and the Irish mob outside the Saw Doctors concert sent a new letter of the word flying down the street, 1 billion fairies at a time. I climbed, and we climbed, and there was legitimacy on the stairs. I was sometimes a professor, that alone, yes, and I filtered into the concert stands, for we were looking to listen. On the first level, I saw an old townsman Worcesterite and did not think it was traditional to say hello. A big part of my newfound drive is understanding that there have been terrible things done within and therefore outside of Irish culture. And the Irish do want it understood how a good Irishman can be when counting on the old stories and ways to live, the mythos, the green, the family values, and Catholic saints. Apparently then, there were fiddlers as well. Stepping over the threshold into the music hall, it was a few staircases to the 3rd level. We sat in a row, and I drank 2 cans of water. Tara's brother, Matt, was funny and supportive of me, trying to do my best, and so was everyone, since my best had become our best. And I stayed with tangible variables in my thinking, tangible reminders of our health and ability. He was as objective as the tombstone. When the band began, they took the stage like spilled bolts of pub lightning, refined into what I, or no one else, who had ever made it out of the pub, ever knew. Irish artists who had been so for many days. The Saw Doctors knew the eyes of the artist and the plight of the Irish psyche, especially in America, where a man like me needs to identify with Ireland, because I'm other stuff while my family has fought to keep remnants of old folkways. I saw Irish art among Irish people, so all the machinery I had been learning, many in the crowd had kept with too, and we used it. But when it became dark, the music was music after all, a sometimes transportive mode. The term machinery, as it is used there, comes from Alexander Pope, born in 1688. So it's not as we used it today, but to characterize the use of deities or spirits in writing, which critics saw as a crutch. I was inevitably going to need to explain what it meant to be doing Muslim things I barely understood. I knew a lot of it had to do with peace with death, but angels then were solemn, and I had to justify my caveat into the tradition of Irish folklore for the time being then, for if I was so brave, if I would rather give in to black death than reach out my hand to craving, I would need a substitute, for the fire was just fire, the barrier between liberation and the humdrum normalcy that may fall subject to exploitation, since we must keep the sacred quiet and removed. I thought of James Joyce, born in 1882, of course, his story, The Dead, published 1914. I knew the old man in the periphery was much more a ferryman than the dumb dunce evil-doing everyman, who would then prod our obsession. What could we use to remain humble and unknowing instead of looking like weak yank dum-dums? Then I knew, of course, in the crowd with the music, the old words bent with sounds, raisings, notes, and crescendo. There it was. There were banshees, at least 300 of those less human ghosts. I sat there and bled out and died and died. I did my dying time so I could listen to the music, so that I could be one of the strong men, so that my kiver would be a mighty golden fish, haloed and worthy of my family. I found it clever and curious in American Psycho, published 1991, when Patrick Bateman was at a U2 concert and projected the evil upon Bono, born 1960. But I'm me, and that was a fictional American personality, written by Bret Easton Ellis, born 1964. I went for a walk. My uncle happened to be there. He was with some of the old townsmen on the first floor. He and my other uncle spoke quickly. It was tight and warm. Then I legged it back upstairs. Family. I got turned around on the second floor for a few minutes. Nothing drastic. I stood open-mouthed. Then I went to go find Tara. They were standing up. We stood at the bar where I got Sour Patch Kids and more water. After 17 minutes or so, Tara and I went back to our seats to watch the musicians, two saw doctors handling an accordion and a saxophone. Tara's grandmother used to play the accordion. I forgot to say, I had to urinate so bad on the van ride over there, the driver pulled over. I had never remembered feeling such a full bladder, and I was in the company of people whom at the point I could not disappoint by getting all psychologically distraught. So I just asked to pull over and go number one. The gas station was chill. The amount of water in me was biblical. He felt camelish, King's English. After the concert, I kept it in a positive direction and mostly waited to confirm what the young people in the dark, humid area already knew. That I was older than them, but supported their dreams. To be as old as me and still be doing it. We drove home. The chatter in the car was relieving. We were driving west. Tara talked about an old man who had come into the hospital vulgar. We talked about transcendence and urban culture, and by then, the old hag if there was an old hag, had given us all onions and garlic and oregano, and there were construction men on the side of the road, and the objective was the same, levity. Lifting up the thoughts, posting packages up, trying to figure out the weight. Blended in Boston. We went back to that friend's house and saw that athletic 90-pound chocolate lab again, Yogi. Then I listened to The Doors' Greatest Hits, released in 1980, from Uncle Freddie. I thought it would be responsible to go to church the next day so there could be community there. The children wouldn't think the holy people were only outside of the church, and every church was some corrupt church. And what is a church at its best? It's not the loose cannon, the drunk, yelling at a cookout, for death is not rowdy. Church is walking through the doors and being yourself as you wish to be, and trusting Jesus and his angels, and all of his eyes will grant you safe passage upward. I listened to Jim Morrison's lyrics early on a Sunday morning and still walk outside and be righteous to all these Spanish girls. They would know. But now it's 5:30 a.m. and I must run up a hill in the blue sun